طبعا احنا الآن في منطقة قريبة جدا من العدو.
After repeated defeats in Mosul, Daesh has resorted to the use of new tactics, which can only be described as dirty and immoral tactics that have nothing to do with the rules of war and humanity. They are using civilians as human shields in order to delay ending terrorism in Mosul.
It's a battle that has turned out to be far costlier and bloodier than many expected. But after 9 months of heavy fighting, the fight for Mosul could be nearing its final phase. Iraqi special forces and federal police are advancing deeper into Mosul, closing in on the densely populated old city. It's the last district under Daesh control. The group is fighting back with mortar fire and car bombs, attacking police positions across the city. Narrow alleyways have also slowed the Iraqi advance, forcing gun battles to take place street by street. Caught in the middle are nearly 150,000 Iraqi civilians who are trapped inside the besieged city. The UN estimates that about 230 civilians have been killed in the past 2 weeks alone, many from heavy bombing from the air. For the Iraqi government, taking the old city will be a major milestone in its battle against Daesh, who has seen its territory across Iraq and Syria dwindle. Well, joining me now from Karbala is Ali Dabbagh. He's the former Iraqi government spokesman, and from Washington, D.C. is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He was the former Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs under U.S. President George W. Bush. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us. Ali Dabbagh, sure. If I can begin with you, sir, how long is it going to take? The Iraqi forces are closing in on the old part of Mosul. How long do you think it's going to take?
I think it will take a few more days. The problem that Iraqi forces in a big challenge right now because of the civilians, which has already been used as a human shield, as the report said, but more than 100,000, the report saying that, and this is a big challenge for the Iraqi government to end this battle in Mosul, and that is make the operation slow down, which they expect as the Iraqi military forces, they expect before Ramadan. And before June, it should be end. But I think that was too optimistic. I think it's a matter of days they will finish. But again, this is a war. Nobody could give a final day that when it could. But the final district, which is a Nuri Mosque, which is symbolic for ISIS, which they are, for them, is the end. They are going to fight till death. So there is no way for them to go out, and that is why you could see that it is so hard for the Iraqi military forces to declare that Mosul being cleared from ISIS militarily.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the civilians. We're going to dive a bit deeper on the issue of civilians and a lot of the moral conundrums that emerge as a result of attacking the city when there are so many civilians. We're going to go into that in a moment. But first, let me ask General Kimmitt, U.S. commanders have called it the toughest in urban warfare since World War II. Why are they saying that? What do they mean by that?
Well, first, I think everybody recognizes how tough street-to-street fighting is. Since World War II, the Great Siege of Stalingrad, which took almost a year to clear out that entire city before the Sixth Army surrendered, was the exact same kind of fighting, house-to-house, street-to-street, district by district. We had the same problem in Hue in North Vietnam, in 1968. The Russians had it in Grozny. But I think characteristically, if you are a defender, you want to fight in a city because you have the natural advantages of terrain, you have the natural advantages of small, contained streets, and in the case of a heinous group such as ISIS, you can also wrap yourselves around civilians.
Yeah, and that seems to be what they're doing. Ali Dabbagh, so let's say it's granted. Daesh are disgusting in their tactics. They use human shields, they use civilians, they don't care about those civilians. Having said all of that, the Iraqi security forces haven't had a good history of protecting civilians. In actual fact, if you ask Der Spiegel, if you ask Human Rights Watch, if you ask Amnesty International, and even the Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi himself, they've criticized the Iraqi security forces and they've criticized Hashd-al-Shaabi militias for killing civilians. So as you mentioned, there are more than 100,000 civilians in Mosul, in the old city of Mosul right now. What's to guarantee that these people won't be harmed or even slaughtered by the liberators of this city?
Right. This is what This is one more challenge which face Iraqi government as well as Ibadi. But you could see that the record in Mosul is much better than the one which is in Al-Anbar. Criticism in Al-Anbar was much more. And now, Iraqi, I am quite sure, and most of the people are sure that Iraqi government, they are trying their utmost in order to not to allow any uncontrolled groups to take hold of the civilians by any names, even under the name of they are ex-ISIS, they are fighters of ISIS. This is the job of a government only. When it goes out of the hand of the government, the problem arises. And I think that in Mosul, most of the measure which Iraqi government been taken to get the popular unit not in the front, not they are knocking the door, not in the front of the battle of Mosul.
So you're saying they've learned from the mistake. They're putting them at the back.
Not only learned from the mistake, taking a great measure and a strict measure against anyone who violate, because that spoiled all the victory in Al-Anbar by minor violation which has been taken. And that minor violation, it is a violation. It's a violation against the civilians, the arrested people till now, the people being criticized that there are people who's been arrested with no reason. But of course, under investigation. In Mosul, the record shows much less than that what we had in Al-Anbar. And I think this is a good record. But at the end, keep in mind, this is a war. People are ISIS, they are again, they just take out they shave their beards and they become normal as a civilians, and nobody knows what they are, what their background.
No, I hear you, but when I spoke to Saad al-Mutalibi last week, he was using the this is a war argument to say, well, when we see an ISIS, when we catch an ISIS, we're going to kill them, right? So some people use that excuse to justify the slaughter of civilians and Daesh suspects. So how can you actually guarantee that nobody's going to do that and kill innocent people?
This is against the rule of law. Even killing ISIS should be sentenced in the court and in the normal jurisdictional authority. It's not the people who are on the site, they do the punishment or they do the revenge. This is again a violation and against the rule of law. And definitely this is whoever saying Saad or anybody else, I think this is against the law, and the Iraqi government needs to take that measure. I think Abadi is taking that measure right now.
Okay, let's bring in General Kimmitt. General Kimmitt, the Iraqis are on the ground, and then you have the coalition taking care of the airspace. Now, there have been a number of coalition airstrikes, and some of them awfully deadly for civilians. Some data came out on June the 2nd, CENTCOM, releasing information that 484 civilians were killed by coalition airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. There's a combination of the two during this campaign to defeat Daesh. Air Wars, who are quite respectable, they came out and said, hold on, that's actually closer to 4,000. As someone who was on the ground in Iraq for all those years, and you were also responsible for communication as well, I remember seeing you during all those press briefings, would the coalition deliberately be downplaying civilian casualties, sir?
No, I don't think the coalition nor the Iraqis are downplaying civilian casualties. As Ali said just now, they recognize that every civilian that is killed, first of all, is a tragedy to that family, but it also works against their efforts. But Imran, I think it's important to take a deep breath and realize that this notion of zero civilian casualty wars is possible. That's a fiction. Sure. It is unfortunate. Yeah, but it's also important to recognize. Let me finish. Let me finish.
Is the coalition and the Iraqis, are they taking the best available precautions? That's my question.
Of course they are. But again, a historical perspective. Civilians were intentionally targeted up until the last 50 years or so. The Germans intentionally targeted London citizens. There were fire bombings of entire cities of civilians. That was done as an act of war to break the will of the enemy. But what the Iraqis are doing and what the civilians, let me finish. Okay. What the Iraqis are doing and what the coalition is doing is going out of their way to use precision weapons, precision targeting for the express purposes of minimizing the civilian casualties. But suggesting that we can fight this purely clean war without civilian casualties, even if you use all of those precision targeting and precision weapons, it is an unfortunate fact of war that this happens, especially when you have an enemy like ISIS.
Some people use that as a cop-out.
Especially when you have an enemy. Well, listen, Ali, are you going to let me finish?
No,
especially when groups such as ISIS are going out of their way to wrap themselves in civilians to create those civilian casualties. So the short answer is yes, we take every possible precaution to use precision weapons and precision targeting, but there will never be a clean war, which is what I believe you are trying to impose upon this.
Hold on.
And that demonstrates a misunderstanding of war and a misunderstanding of the situation on the ground.
Okay, General Kimmett, if I could come in. War is ugly, war is brutal, war is terrible. You've given a World War II historical analogy. If I may come back with one of my own. If you were representing the Allies or the UK government at the time of the bombing of Dresden, I wouldn't be questioning how evil the Nazis were to you. But if they were killing tens of thousands of civilians, which they were, I would ask, are you trying to minimize civilian casualties? That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying no civilian should die. I understand war. Is that fair?
Well, again, you answered your own question. In World War II and in Korea and in other wars, civilians were seen as open targets. It was a method of breaking the will of the enemy to understand that we would not only inflict war upon your soldiers, but upon your civilians. That is no longer done. It is no longer considered acceptable. We will minimize the risk of civilian casualties by precision targeting, by precision weaponry. I can tell you that the coalition probably waves off 9 out of every 10 potential targets that they could attack because of the risk of civilian casualties. But again, you can never eliminate the risk of civilian casualties in war, and to suggest that is foolhardy.
Okay, final question for Ali Dabbagh. This is ugly, it's getting uglier as the Iraqis and the coalition try to retake the old city of Mosul. How important is it, sir, that in conjunction with Mosul being retaken in Iraq from Daesh, that very soon afterwards, Raqqa is retaken and liberated across the border in Syria?
One of the problems which Iraqi government faced, that the Raqqa still is in the hand of ISIS. If could Raqqa, the attack on Raqqa and the getting rid of ISIS in Raqqa, it could make the thing easier in Mosul. But at the end, I think Mosul, the symbolic of Mosul, it is a caliphate location. It's a caliphate center. It's a caliphate place where there's a Nuri mosque, which is the God symbolic. When you get out Mosul, I think Daesh symbolically, even though they are in Hawija or they are in Tel Afar or in any other small district in surrounding Mosul, but symbolically that the Mosul when being taken, when Al-Nuri mosque being taken, this is the declaration that Mosul, ISIS is end in Iraq. It's not going to end. They are going to have to go on underground, definitely. They will use the other ideology of killing from the underground, their activities. But again, this is a symbolic that the declaration of cleaning Mosul from ISIS presence, this is very, very important and symbolic for the Iraq. And again, it is for ISIS, keep in mind, that ISIS, they are defending that location as it is symbolic for whole the state, the so-called Islamic State, which they are declaring and they are promoting everywhere in the region.
Okay, well, war is never clean. It's never without casualties, but we hope that Daesh is defeated in as humane a way as possible. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Ali Dabbagh
Thank you.
and Brigadier General Mark Kimmett. Thanks so much.
Thank you.